Dune is, in many respects, a novel of ideas. There's all sorts of different mixtures of real and fictional ideology that come together in Dune in kind of unusual ways. For instance, the religion of the Fremen is Zen-Sunni, which is an interesting combination of Zen Buddhism and Islam that actually works pretty well, surprisingly enough. The Tleilaxu have Zen Sufism, which is kind of representative of the most extreme forms of Wahhabism and Sharia law. You also have anti-technology sentiment, you have various pseudo-religious movements like the Bene Gesserit, etc. But probably the biggest idea in the series is the concept of the Golden Path, which was first seen by Paul Atreides and is kind of seen as what made him really walk away from being emperor. Not just the death of his wife, not just his blindness, but his unwillingness to walk the Golden Path. Because it was so horrible and so terrible, he lacked the strength of will to do it. However, his son Leto II was willing to walk the Golden Path and to accept all the consequences that came with it. In essence, what Leto saw as the failings of humanity was that it had grown stagnant. In the 10,000 years since the end of the Butlerian Jihad and the foundation of the Spacing Guild, there had been virtually no technological, social, or cultural changes to the galaxy. The galaxy as it was ruled by the Corrinos, the Emperor, who had a balance of power with the Landsraad and the Spacing Guild. And you had these three different organizations who kind of balanced off against each other. And I guess you also had the Bene Gesserit, you had the Tleilaxu, there's a bunch of other factors. But basically, the Landsraad was a combination of the great houses who all owned their own planet, their own solar system, or multiple planets. Probably some asteroids, some moons, that sort of thing. So there were thousands of houses across the galaxy that all owned fiefs, ostensibly at the behest of the Emperor. The Emperor controlled probably a couple hundred planets himself, and had a number of legions of Sardaukar who were so superior to the normal troops of the Landsraad that it would take an alliance of virtually all of them, or at least like a huge number of them, to take him down. So you had this very even balance between the power of the Emperor and the Landsraad. You also have the Spacing Guild. Now, for those of you who don't understand, who haven't read Dune, essentially in Dune, there is no faster-than-light travel. What they have is full space-time engines, which allow you to move instantly from one place in the universe to another. The problem is, because you're moving instantaneously, it's impossible to avoid obstacles. Like, you might hit a star, you might hit a planet, you might hit a piece of rock. And because you're moving at infinite speed, you're increasing the danger infinitely. So, to pilot a full space-time equipped ship, you have to be able to see the future. You have to have prescience. You have to have the ability to see all possible routes and pick the only safe one. So the only people who can fly a faster-than-light ship is guild members. And guild members are immersed in tanks of spice gas, which allows them to see the future and makes them biologically immortal. So because of this, space travel is pretty much entirely dependent upon the Spacing Guild, and thus dependent upon the spice melange, which is only found on Arrakis. And that also, in Leto's view, contributed to the stagnancy of the galaxy. You had a very stable system where the Emperor and the Landsraad were balanced off against each other. You had the Guild, who was only interested in making money and maintaining social stability, as most of the guild members had long since stopped caring about what normal humans did anyways, as many of them had ceased to be human. So within this environment of near complete stability, you had a 10,000 year period where there was no social, political, economic change whatsoever. There's also a general antipathy towards technology, which was a result of the Butlerian Jihad in which they overthrew the thinking machines and liberated humanity from their tyranny. So that had all happened. So after what happened in the events of Dune is Paul had succeeded in becoming emperor of the known universe by threatening to destroy the source of spice on Arrakis. Because the whole universe, the whole Imperium of 10,000 worlds was so dependent on it, because if the source of spice were to be destroyed, eventually the Spacing Guild would die out and interplanetary travel would basically become impossible. I think there is faster than light travel, it's just not very efficient, because they did have faster than light travel prior to the discovery of full space engines, but it's just not very efficient. It just doesn't work very well in comparison, and everything is set up to use full space engines. So because he threatened to do that, he was able to become emperor and rule the galaxy as basically a direct autocracy by placing his throne on Arrakis and holding the spice hostage. So when Leto looked at this, he saw a humanity that was overly centralized. There had been no expansion since the foundation of the Imperium. It was basically just the 10,000 worlds, very few additional ones had been colonized. And the Imperium was small enough, and I know 10,000 worlds it's kind of funny to say it's small enough, but everything was charted, everything was known. You could theoretically memorize the names of most of the major planets. While it was vast by our comprehension, it was still a knowable amount of space. Humanity was one civilization, more or less. So he viewed this as a fundamentally bad thing, because he thought it prevented development if all of humanity was united, and it was so easy for one person or one house or one government to exert such strong control over all of humanity, and for humanity to be utterly dependent upon spice from the planet. He also was worried, ironically enough, about the ability of those with prescience, those with the ability to see the future and more or less reign as gods over lesser men. And his plan ultimately sought to, in his view, free humanity once and for all, to kind of undo the end of history that had happened under the Imperium and to get things moving again. He viewed this as being necessary in order to, I guess, restart the galaxy. He referred to it as saving humanity and keeping it strong, I guess you could say. So to ensure the consistency of his vision and to ensure that he would be around to oversee it, Leto allowed his body to fuse with that of a sandworm, which made him essentially biologically immortal and capable of living for any amount of time. Additionally, because he was part worm, his body automatically generated spice, which gave him an unlimited supply of spice that was going directly into him, which further enhanced his abilities beyond his prescience and his psychic abilities beyond that of pretty much anyone else in the Duneverse. I guess maybe there's some people who were kind of similar in power, like Norma Zafira, but in general, most people regard Leto II as being the most powerful figure in the Duneverse. So, under this, he was able to rule as an immortal emperor, as kind of an all-knowing, all-present god who could see everything and could control the most minute aspects of his subjects' lives. As he became emperor, he instituted a much more centralized bureaucratic system than had existed before. The Carinos were happy with just collecting tax revenues and mediating between the various great houses. Paul Atreides demanded the loyalty and obedience of the houses, but largely left them alone once again. Leto more or less deliberately broke apart the great houses, driving them to bankruptcy or extinction. He destroyed a number of old organizations, such as the Mentat School. I think he shut down the Swordmasters of Ginaz as well. But everything was massively centralized. Every aspect of the economy, social, political, and cultural life was entirely run by him and his bureaucracy, to the point where he deliberately created a system under which none of the planets in the Imperium were self-sufficient at all. So there were dedicated agricultural worlds, dedicated industrial worlds, dedicated, I guess, kind of water worlds, and none of them possessed even the most basic diversity. Like the industrial worlds would have no ability whatsoever to produce food. The agricultural worlds would have no ability whatsoever to produce any sort of manufactured thing. So all the worlds were 100% dependent upon his extremely complicated bureaucracy to ferry resources from one world to another. And that was kind of part of how his regime maintained power, but was also part of his long-term plan. Another part of this is he created the fish speakers, which were kind of unique in galactic history as they were an all-female police force, or I guess an all-female warrior corps, which grew out of the descendants of the Sardaukar and the Fremen. The idea behind using women was Leto felt that lacking kind of the natural desire to take his throne, that they would be a much more stable force. Because in general, masculinity is the creative and destructive force, and femininity is the sustaining force. So it was kind of the perfect complement to his empire, which he intended to be completely static and incredibly repressive. And that was kind of the interesting thing, because while it was extremely repressive, everyone in Leto's empire was able to eat, and there was, in a sense, prosperity, albeit in an extremely restricted state. Culture was massively suppressed, religion was suppressed, basically everything other than worship of the god emperor, and working towards this complex mercantilist mutual support of the different worlds. So that was kind of how it went along. Another plan of his was to breed humans but having an immunity to prescience, that they could not be seen and thus could not be controlled, and their fates not determined by those who could see the future. And he was able to breed several of these people, but eventually his plan was to disperse this gene to all of the human race, so that another prescient one such as himself could never control it. So now we kind of get into what actually happened with the Golden Path. And I'm sorry the lead up took so long, but I'm covering like 4 books. So when Leto eventually died, and he had planned for a long time that someone would eventually kill him or something would eventually make him lose his throne, and he willingly and gladly accepted his death. As soon as he died, the fish speakers abandoned their posts, the bureaucracy fell apart, and there was no longer the complex system that needed to be in place to maintain the exchange of resources between the various worlds. It just wasn't happening anymore. And so you had the famine times in which trillions of people starved, in which there was widespread chaos, disorder. Entire planets went dark as the people having no means to feed themselves or no means to clothe themselves died, like I said, by the trillions. Now, during the period of Leto's empire, he had been encouraging the Ixians, who are they produce most of the new technology, to develop alternatives to the guild navigators. And they succeeded in creating the No ship. I think it's called a No Drive, I'm not sure, but the No ship is a ship that's immune to prescience, and also it has, I don't know exactly how it works, but it replicates through mechanical means the ability of a guild navigator. So a prescient ship, so a No ship can fold space without the need of a navigator. Anyone can pilot it, anyone can fly it. So Leto had actually supported the construction of it because it would once and for all make humanity no longer dependent upon the spice in order to maintain space travel. How much he actually knew about it, I'm not sure, but the Tleilaxu also succeeded in developing their own way to make spice through axolotl tanks, which we'll talk about some other time. But during the famine times, trillions of people got onto No ships and guild highliners and fled the Imperium, fled the crumbling ruins of what had once been a civilization that included all of humanity. And this was kind of Leto's ultimate goal, was the event The Scattering, where trillions of people, perhaps most of the majority of the, probably perhaps a majority of the population of the Imperium, fled into the unexplored space and founded tens of thousands, maybe even like 100,000 colonies spread out through the unknown galaxy. Now that humanity had been scattered so far and so wide, it was effectively impossible for any one man to ever control all of humanity again. It was impossible for someone to even comprehend how far humanity had spread, to know all the worlds that were inhabited, etc. The idea was humanity was so dispersed and so spread out and so decentralized that there could never really be a credible threat to its extinction again. You couldn't have a galaxy-wide jihad that you had during the reign of Paul Atreides that could succeed in exterminating humanity. So, what wound up happening? There's also, so because people have been oppressed so long, technological development restarted, culture surged forward. The idea was for him to teach humanity once and for all the dangers of allowing a charismatic leader to dominate them, the dangers of over-centralization, the dangers of stagnancy. All of these various things he believed that he taught them. And to a certain extent, Leto did achieve his goals. Humanity did spread out in the scattering. The remains of what had been the old Imperium more or less became a loose confederation under the Bene Gesserit. And the people who remained there had no idea what was even happening in the scattering. Unfortunately, though, all Leto really, in my opinion at least, managed to do was, while he scattered humanity across the galaxy, he also scattered human nature across the galaxy. Within a couple hundred years of humanity beginning to settle new worlds, a group emerged called the Honored Matres. Martyrs? I don't know if it's Honored Martyrs or Honored Mothers, how you're supposed to pronounce it. But they were an offshoot of the fish speakers in the Bene Gesserit, who were far more cruel than either of their predecessors. Using mental domination, sexual slavery, it's kind of difficult to describe, but it's in Dune. Women who have gone certain training and large amounts of spice can make men sexually addicted to them and more or less mind control them. So they created an extremely brutal, evil, horrible regime that dominated most of the scattering. They also used planet killers with a great deal of used planet killers very liberally. So in effect, all, in my opinion, Leto did was he just made the problems of humanity bigger. He made humanity bigger, but the problems grew with them. And a similar system of repression, even worse than the one he had created and that he foresaw in the old Imperium, took place in the scattering. And ultimately, his efforts were all kind of for naught because of the return of the thinking machines. But that's a topic for another day. So in essence, the Golden Path was an attempt to repress humanity for a lengthy period of time to teach them a lesson, to make, to kind of make the pressure build up so much that when it spurred forward, it would permanently break the pipe and break the mold, as it were. So that's more or less the Golden Path. I hope that made sense. It's a lot of stuff to compress in a very short amount of time. And Dune is one of the more esoteric novels. It's not everything is particularly clear or easy to explain. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed more of Sci-Fi Pol Sci, and I'll talk to you later.